Hey, good morning. Welcome back. Doing a little stock market technical analysis. So I know it's been busy. For those that don't know, I do work as a nurse. So I was off for a little bit, was able to put out a video kind of updating. This will be, of course, an M1 update. But we're doing a little technical analysis on the stock market. So as I had talked about previously, where the market slowed down around the 24K mark, looking on the short term, let's look over here. Actually, let's look at the 15-minute. So looking at the 15-minute on the Dow, we're seeing that the market is again right back at around that 24K mark. We did subsequently break out above the 25K. You can see right here where the market hit around that 25K mark, and then again kind of double touched it again, trying right over here. This looks like back on March 20th, reaching for that 25K and then subsequently sliding down. And we're seeing the market exhibiting some weakness again right here around the 25K mark. For the most part, if the market was going to hold 24K, I would have believed it would have held it over here. And I think we're holding steadily currently at around 23K. So a dip below 23K will spell coming down to probably around, I'd say like that 21.5 or 20K. Whereas where I would be looking to add some more liquidity. I mean, I'm currently adding basically maybe every week or every other week, adding to the market for my current M1 portfolio. But in looking at where the market is, we're seeing that the market is showing a little bit of weakness at the 24K mark, especially with what we're seeing in relation to the millions of people who are currently out of work. Many states are now trying to get their states back to work by laxing the quarantine, which could, of course, spell a little bit of a disaster if COVID-19 starts to regrow, which I think it will within certain states. Here in New York, we are seeing a decline, especially in the hospital setting, with many of these patients hopefully being able to go home. Unfortunately, many more are just in essence waiting to die. Realistically speaking, from the nursing standpoint, many patients who have been in the hospital for a month or longer, and many of those who are old are literally waiting to die or go on to like nursing facilities where they will basically be placed on hospice because many of these patients cannot come off of oxygen. And I was happy to see a young man that I took care of in the ICU who is 28 years old. Finally, after I think a little over 6 weeks of intubation, was actually extubated the other day and made it down to our step down unit last night. And I was kind of shocked because I was actually looking for the individual. I was off for about 10 days on scheduled vacation that I had previously to, we do our vacations, at the beginning of the year and kind of plot them in so everybody can have their allocated vacation. And I was very surprised when I came back that the man was actually still there. And I was like, oh my God, this guy's been here so long and he's still intubated. Like, is he actually going to come off? And thankfully he did come off. He was a young man of 28. We had several young individuals that were 24, 26, 28, 30 that required intubation for long periods of time. And so I was happy to see that he did come off. So that was very nice. The individual is still on oxygen. And even though we see a lot of COVID patients that have in essence been recovered, looking at the amount of patients here that you can see that just about 216,000 people have recovered. And unfortunately, about a third of the total who have basically have the virus. And then at least from the hospital standpoint, is about a third of the patients unfortunately have lost their lives. And you can see even last night, there were another 2250 patients who unfortunately died. The previous night, we had 2 individuals on our unit pass away. And that is the unfortunate reality that is going forward for the next several months, possibly for the next year or two, or until a company, comes out with a vaccine, whether it's, a company like Pfizer or Gilead or Moderna. These are some of the pharmaceutical companies that are currently working on a vaccine, and of course other medications that can be utilized for managing such patients. But again, talking about the Dow, as we see in the market subsequently is currently holding around that 24K mark. The market is slightly up today. It looks like the futures are up about 100. I think earlier in the morning around 5:30, futures were showing around 250, 260. The market was up, and we've subsequently come back some. And I think the market will more than likely either hold here for some time or take a little bit of a dive like it did yesterday. The primary problem with what's going on in the market, and why, of course, the market didn't continue to in essence, continue to sell off, was obviously the Fed said that they were going to come in and they were going to buy up the market. They were injecting liquidity into the market, whether they were going to directly bail out companies, like, for example, Boeing. Boeing was a company that I was thinking was going to go even further down. And then Boeing announced that they were going to get some money from the government, and Boeing slingshot from around $80, excuse me, to about the 190 mark, and subsequently came right back down. And we've seen that in many different sectors of the market, where the market, the federal government said they're literally going to be coming in and buying junk bonds. So it makes it a little bit harder, because we haven't been in a fair market. We haven't been in a fair market for some times, where buyers and sellers are dictating where the markets are going, where companies should be valued, because literally there is this safety net underneath investors, I should say primarily underneath companies, where when things go bad, they just kind of cry to the government, and the government steps in and basically socializes losses while privatizing gains. And so it makes it a little bit harder for the average small investor to come in and understand, well, where the market should have kind of taken its time, where we should have seen people kind of get back to work, and the market overall sort of recover, where we see more people going back to work. We see less worry about coronavirus. We see more stabilization in oil. We're not seeing any of that. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more people risking their lives going back to work. Certain states where they're kind of complaining that you're opening up the states too early. Certain doctors have come on to TV and social media and said that in their particular state that perhaps they're opening up the state too early. They're worried about a resurgence, etc. So it makes it a little bit harder to know where exactly to place your money, because you might think, well, I think this stock is going to keep on coming down, so I'm going to hold off a little bit and wait till it comes down and I get a little bit of a cheaper price. And then the government steps in and says, oh, well, we're going to bail out. And then you see the market kind of shoot up, or that particular stock shoot up, whether it's companies, like Boeing or other airlines, etc., where the government says they're literally going to come in and they're going to step in and kind of do everything that they can. And they've stated, QE unlimited, etc. But with that said, as a result, I just continue to basically put money away into my primarily dividend portfolio. Currently, I've added just a little over 7,000, and I've got a little bit more money coming that I put in for today, because I have a couple of buys that I want to do on certain stocks, which is what I've been doing. I've been kind of like, instead of just spreading it out, I've been kind of looking at the charts and trying to average down in certain scenarios where maybe I've gotten in a little too early. Like, for example, in Carnival Cruise, I did get in a little bit early on Carnival Cruise, and so I'm slowly adding in a little bit, maybe week by week, to kind of average down. I do think that Carnival Cruise will be a long-term play. One play that I did want to talk about that I added into my risk were some airlines, basically UAL, American Airlines, JetBlue, and Delta. But my primary company that I do like is JetBlue, and I did want to talk about a little bit about JetBlue. The reason that I like JetBlue is, even though it's not as big a company as many of the other airlines, it also doesn't have as much debt. But what really kind of piqued my interest in JetBlue was doing it right. JetBlue, as it says here, this was back in April. This was back in April 28th. It says JetBlue is the first major U.S. airline to require masks for passengers. And from a nursing standpoint, I applaud them for taking that stance, whether they were pressured by their employees or by some other union group. At the very least, they were the first ones to do the right thing and require some sort of a covering for people coming on to the airline. I would say airlines are actually in a safer spot than things like cruises, primarily because, at least from the airline standpoint, the airline can protect themselves and, of course, protect their passengers by requiring them to come onto the airplane and utilizing some sort of a face covering, because that's primarily how the virus spreads, through droplets. Whether it's asymptomatically, maybe you have allergies or you have a little bit of a cough. I mean, sometimes I wake up in the morning, I have a little bit of a cough. I mean, we just cough naturally. Our body naturally produces a little bit of mucus, and on occasion, it will cause us to cough. It's for our protection. With allergy season coming, sometimes in the morning I have the sniffles, or I've got, my eyes are a little bit itchy, or I have a little bit of a cough because of allergies. It's getting a little bit warmer. We're seeing, the leaves are going to start to come back in. Certain people will have, sneezing fits, and it is to the advantage of the airliners to require their passengers to wear some sort of a face covering. And I thought JetBlue taking the first stand, they were the only company. Other companies were kind of shying away from it because they probably were trying to get as many passengers as possible onto the plane. But JetBlue said, we're going to think safety first. And I thought that was really great. And of course, as a result, now all other airliners are basically jumping on board and following that same line of reasoning, that they're requiring everybody to have masks. And I think that was a great idea. I would say the next step would be requiring on booking, I should say on check-in. It says wearing a face mask covering isn't about, they have said wearing a face mask covering isn't about protecting yourself, it's about protecting those around you. And I agree with them, right? The JetBlues, that's according to the JetBlues president, Joanna Garrity, that she had said in a statement. It says, this is the new flying etiquette. It says on board, cabin air is well circulated and cleaned through filters every few minutes. But this is a shared space where we have to be considerate of others. And I thought that was a great stance that she took. I would say the very next thing to step up their game, and for all airliners for that matter, would be for all of them to require that their passengers have to sanitize their hands. Either they could bring their own. I know some sanitizers can leave your hands dry, so maybe you have like a personal one that you can use that has like a little bit of aloe so it doesn't completely dry out your hands. But I would say that would be the very next thing that would really make individuals feel much more safe about coming onto a plane, is that they knew that everybody coming on board had some sort of a face covering. And the other thing would be that they were required to cleanse their hands with some sort of a hand sanitizer. The primary reason is that most people don't appropriately wash their hands for the required 20 or 30 seconds, which is why, even from the nursing standpoint, for example, when I worked as a home care nurse, the government required nurses primarily to utilize hand sanitizer, because even nurses were not washing their hands for the appropriate amount of time. And so hand sanitizer is much more effective, just because humans just don't do it correctly. They don't use enough soap, or they don't take enough time to wash their hands. Typically, they say, you're supposed to sing happy birthday twice to appropriately, work up enough lather, get in between the fingernail, get in between your fingers and on your fingernails and on the wrist, etc. So I think that would be the very next step that airlines should take to make their passengers feel much more secure. So before boarding the plane, I would say maybe whoever is in charge of checking in gives everybody a little bit of a spritz on their hands, and as the persons are boarding the plane, they are there cleansing their hands. And of course, I know every airline is taking into precautions, making sure the airplanes are cleaned in between flights, which is great. But it's also because individuals, while they're on board, could be touching things where they can transfer the virus that way. And so making sure that everybody has some sort of a hand sanitizer before boarding and after coming off would be a great idea, as well as, of course, even perhaps during the plane, where they could, offer people some form of hand sanitizer, so that this is happening frequently while they're on the plane, maybe like every hour or so, where kind of everybody just goes through the formality of having to keep their hands clean, having to wear the face mask for the duration of of course, their trip. And that basically just stops if anybody does cough. It kind of limits the distance that the droplets can, of course, basically move around the cabin. As they said that the cabin is filtered, but of course having that extra layer, I think, was a really good step for JetBlue to take. And so it kind of got me to think a little bit more about JetBlue, and that's why I decided, with my portfolio, that I would add JetBlue into my risk portion of my portfolio. I would bump it up to about 8%. So I'm going to be putting more money into it. Just looking at the stock, one thing that I did notice was JetBlue looking like a double or even a triple bounce here at the $7 mark, and it looks like it could hold the $8 mark. Again, when all the other stocks fell, JetBlue fell slightly less. When Warren Buffett had said that he didn't think that airlines were where he wanted to go with Berkshire Hathaway, and I understand that maybe he's looking for the longer run, and for whatever reason he didn't think that airliners would be able to offer enough value for him. But I think if airlines were to go this route, it would make it much easier for individuals to, for example, be able to travel. Because I'm a traveler, I do a lot of traveling, which is why, like, my schedule, I typically clump everything into the middle of our schedule, and then I kind of have like a week or so on either end because I enjoy traveling. So typically I travel maybe 4 or 5 times a year or more, and I would go out of the country. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to do that. And me as a nurse, I would feel much safer knowing that they're, one, requiring individuals to wear some sort of a face covering, because I know I would wear one. And two, that they were making sure that these individuals were practicing appropriate hand washing, which goes a long way, because that's another way that we spread the virus, is by all the different things that we touch and we come in contact with that can, of course, spread the virus. And then maybe you accidentally touch your eye, or you eat something and you forget to clean your hands, or you touch your mouth, etc. is one way that different ways that we can, of course, become infected, not just with COVID, but with other forms of viruses and bacteria, etc. So I thought that was a really good part on JetBlue's part. And basically looking at the chart, we can see that the chart seems to be bottoming a bit. JetBlue is going to be coming out with earnings, so I'll have to wait and see what's going to happen with the stocks. I'm sure certain airlines are going to show how much they've lost. JetBlue not having as many planes as other airlines means that they're not burning through, of course, as much cash, and they typically have a much lower debt ratio than many other ones. But that's basically kind of where I'm at. Like I've said, I'll be adding more money tomorrow, and of course, typically I'm trying to add about 1,000. I would say at least 1,000 a month, and we're right on track. I'm basically right on track. I basically started this M1 portfolio back in November 25th. It was where I first started adding $200. So basically, in terms of a month to month, we're basically at our 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're coming right into basically our 5th month. And of course, I am well along with adding liquidity, adding money to this account, and I will continue to add at the very least 1,000. That was my goal, was to get at least 1,000 a month into this account, and of course we are right on track. So hopefully in the next video I'll be able to go into a little bit more in depth about some changes that I have made into the account. I do have about 48 different stocks. I did make some allocations here where I kind of upped a little bit the amount of dividends. I think previously I was at 20%, and I did lower, just for now, the amount of money that's going into the bonds, because I'm really trying to allocate a little bit more money into my dividends. So I do have a couple of buys that are going in today for certain stocks that I do like, that I'm trying to average down a little bit more in. One of them, of course, is Ladder Corporation. Is a real estate stock that I do like. I've traded it before, and I've kind of like where it's at, and it did post better numbers yesterday than was expected, and it's gapping up a little bit today. But like I said, since I don't know where the market is going to go, primarily because at the end of the day, investors know that the federal government is going to step in, and so as a small investor, I can't say, well, I'm going to wait for the market to pull back because I perceive that sellers are going to come in, because at the end of the day, we now have this kind of safety net that, the more bigger hedge funds know that the government is going to step in. So I know I have to basically just strategically look at charts, pick stocks that I think are kind of bottoming out or basing out, or for example, looking at other stocks that I think maybe are going to have a little bit of a pullback, like for example, T still looks like a good buy. I'll probably be adding some more money into AT&T. But then I look at things. I think it was, what was I looking at? AMD the other day? No, I think it was maybe Pfizer. Yeah, I was looking at Pfizer and I was like, I'm not quite sure. The stock looks like it's had a really good run. I will add maybe a little bit, but not necessarily as much as I normally would. I do think Pfizer will have a little bit of a pullback, especially if, for example, these vaccines don't work out. I know everybody's kind of hyped up about the vaccines, that, oh, we're going to get a vaccine. Realistically speaking, there are no vaccines for coronavirus. And I don't just mean COVID-19. The common cold is a coronavirus. MERS is a coronavirus, as well as SARS. These are all different types of coronaviruses, and none of them have a vaccine. And they've been trying to find a vaccine for the common cold for about 50 or 60 years now without any success. So I'm not as hopeful that they will find something. I know I certainly won't be the guinea pig that will be taking a COVID-19 vaccine until I see it well in it, that it works without any side effects. I typically don't like vaccines, but working in a hospital and you're coming in contact with numerous patients that have different communicable diseases. So of course, the hospital either requires us to take the vaccine or to utilize a mask for the duration of, like, for example, the flu season. The other thing I did want to talk about was I did finally open up my Roth IRA with M1. So currently I have about 833, as you can see. We're slightly up in this one, and you can see my allocation here, which I will go more into my Roth IRA and of course how I've allocated my current M1. I don't want this video to be too long. It is a little bit longer than I wanted, but I will say, if you are an M1 portfolio user, then I would certainly say, unfortunately, because the federal government is coming into play, they still have about $3 or $4 trillion on the sideline that they're waiting. They currently said that they are going to be buying junk bonds. They currently have not purchased any junk bonds. And I'm seeing, for example, companies like CCL. I do believe CCL said that they were issuing something like 750 million in junk bonds. And I'm wondering if a lot of these companies are looking to do that in anticipation that the federal government will be purchasing junk bonds. I know they might not do it for CCL because Carnival Cruise is not necessarily a American-based company, but unfortunately, we never know. So with that said, our next topic that I'll probably talk about maybe tomorrow, because I am off tomorrow, and then I'm back at the hospital Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I've got one day off this week, which will be Thursday. So hopefully I'll be able to put another video together for tomorrow. I did want to get something out today because it's been a while since I posted something. I hope you guys are taking care of yourself. Thanks for watching. Take care. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. And of course, leave any questions you have in the chat regarding either what's going on, medically speaking, from COVID, or if you have any questions regarding any stocks, charts, etc. Thanks for watching. Take care. God bless.